Hey guys, Level Cap here. Today we're going to be doing a mailbox video where I take questions from you guys and answer them on a weekly or semi-weekly basis. Last video was pretty fun to do. You guys seem to like it, so here's another one. The first question today comes from Darcy McKee, who says, in an FPS world mainly dominated by Battlefield and Call of Duty franchises, do you think it's possible for another company to make a game that would compete with those two games? And actually somebody responded to that comment with PUBG and Fortnite. That, to an extent, is pretty accurate. I think to compete with those two games, the easiest thing that has been done is by creating a new genre that has become wildly successful. So the Battle Royale genre has just like taken over. PUBG's kind of on its way out. Fortnite is here to stay as the biggest game ever, but I think that there's always room and opportunity for other games to sort of step in and take over those titles. I think Call of Duty has certainly been on a bit of a decline hype-wise for a long time now. It's not to say that the franchise isn't still huge, but the gaming format, the gaming style is very old and a bit dated, and so really the industry is just waiting for new, fresh ideas to come along and replace those guys. Because you can imagine a lot of people who used to play Call of Duty all the time, maybe every day, some of them are now playing Fortnite. Some of them are now playing PUBG. These new titles are coming in. They're taking away audience. Battlefield is just as vulnerable. Any game coming in to try and do what Battlefield does better or create a game that's also really fun and engaging but has some of the same interests of Battlefield is going to steal away audience. For example, Insurgency Sandstorm is going to come out soon, and that has the sort of modern military shooter element that Battlefield has neglected for a while. I imagine they're going to develop quite a strong following of modern military shooter fans who are going to be pulled away from the Battlefield franchise. So yes, ultimately I think Call of Duty and Battlefield are just as vulnerable and susceptible to new good games coming out and dominating the market, and they have to constantly innovate and use the tools available to them to try and make each successive title more and more interesting than the last. The next question comes from Anthony Crawford. He says, high level, been sub since Battlefield 3 and Airsoft days. What do you think of the way aircraft play out in Battlefield 5? I think the bombers need a bit of a buff, especially if we aren't getting a bombing site. The air-to-ground package for Spitfires also seems to be a bit lacking, some much-needed splash damage. What are your thoughts? I've said this in multiple videos now, but just to reiterate, I think the air combat or the air versus ground combat is painfully lacking. It feels like there's two separate battles going on right now. Air fighting air and ground fighting ground, and they don't really seem to intermix much at all in the Battlefield 5 alpha. The lack of spotting makes it very hard to pinpoint ground targets. Perhaps the weapons are capable of dealing more damage to ground targets, but without spotting and the ease of locating enemies, it seems to be almost pointless anyway. The air-to-air combat is slow and sluggish, and yes, the lack of bomber sites does kind of, well, I wouldn't say it sucks, but it changes things up a bit. The original Battlefield 1942, I believe, didn't really have bomber sites for a lot of stuff, so you would just have to kind of eyeball it and dive bomb tanks. The Stuka is very hard to get a tank kill with. I think it is doable, and I think players are going to have to learn how to dive at the appropriate angles to get those kills. But yeah, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for the air combat, and my hope is that the Battlefield 5 alpha was just a very, very rough iteration of aerial combat, and that hopefully the devs are much further along than they were in the alpha, because yeah, it wasn't good. The next question comes from Pierre Anquet, who says, do you think the success of Fortnite, which is a free-to-play title, will encourage other developers to release more free-to-play games? Absolutely. I think the sort of rise of free-to-play as a format and the massive success of it is something that many other developers are looking at. They're probably fearful of, but have already started to incorporate many of the microtransaction models that free-to-play games have done, like with Star Wars Battlefront 2. EA tried to implement a lot of those microtransactions into their fully paid model. The FIFA games from EA also incorporate a lot of the microtransaction stuff in there. So they've already borrowed that stuff over. I think the big developers are just trying to make sure that they can still make as much or a lot of money using a free-to-play model versus the fully paid model before they convert certain titles over. But I think it is ultimately inevitable. You know, with competition, games are going to get better and better. Someone's going to say, hey, look, Battlefield's a great game, but it costs $60. Come play our game that has 95% of the same features and graphic quality for free. Once that happens, developers are going to be forced to start making their titles free. The developers of War Thunder are working on a World War II first-person shooter that is going to be free to play called Enlisted. The graphics look cool. I don't know how successful or big of a game it will be, but in a sense it's competing in the same market as Battlefield 5, and it's going to be a free-to-play title. I don't think we're quite at the area in which free-to-play games will have as big of a monetary investment behind them as games like Battlefield 5. And EA and the DICE dev team have done such an incredible job with the production quality and the graphics. It's pretty hard for other big developers to sort of match them with a free-to-play format, but eventually we will get there. Graphics engines will become cheaper, the graphic quality will be easier to replicate, and free-to-play titles will get better and better looking with more and more feature-rich games. So maybe 5 years from now, we will have games as good or as feature-rich as Battlefield 5 that are also free to play. The next question comes from Priyam Patel, who says, what direction would you like EA/DICE to take after Battlefield 5? Setting, gameplay, mechanics, etc. Well, I've said this before Battlefield 5 was announced and before we knew what the setting of the game was. I wanted it to be modern military. I think that they've neglected modern military for a little bit too long, and since they spent, it was something like 7 years purely focusing on modern military and building up an audience of fans who enjoyed modern military, to me it seems weird that they would just shift so hard to historical and not come back to modern military at all. I think after Battlefield 1 they should have come back to modern military and then save their World War II game for after that. So kind of do historical, modern, futuristic, modern, you know, but always coming back to modern in between their more maybe experimental titles. I think modern military is one of the easier to market games. It gives you a lot of freedom with gadgets and technology. You can push it a little bit into the future in terms of like tech that we're currently working on but might not be field tested right now. We can sort of put those things in the games and sort of push the boundaries of what we're able to do with technology or weapons a little bit. And we have almost complete freedom with what theaters or what environments we want to fight in. Both Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 focused on fictional conflicts that allowed us to go all around the world and fight all these different conflicts in any kind of environment. So I think the freedom of modern military, the weapon variety, the cool factor of modern weapons that appeals to a lot of people, it just makes a lot of sense. And some of my favorite Battlefield games have been modern military with the fast time to kill, fully automatic weapons. I just really enjoyed that. So I think DICE should really try and bring modern military back into the fold in a big way. I'm not saying they have to focus on it exclusively, but instead of neglecting it for what will basically be, 6 years now, maybe come back to it. Now, in a similar vein, Paul Potts asks, do you think that DICE will ever take Battlefield Back to the Future? Not the actual Back to the Future franchise, but take it back to a 2142 style game. I think that a lot of people really enjoyed Battlefield 2142, but thematically, I think Battlefield's fans have been a lot less flexible than maybe we thought they were before. Now with Reddit and social media taking over so much of popular opinions or fan base having a much bigger voice, I think people who enjoy modern military or historical military are far less interested in futuristic titles in general. This is just something I've noticed. It certainly doesn't apply to everyone. I have no problem with futuristic shooters. I like it a lot. Then again, I really enjoy a lot of science fiction, movies, books, video games, all that stuff. So I have no problem with Battlefield going futuristic, but I don't know if it's a smart marketing decision for them. I think their fan base is not as interested in a futuristic title as they are in modern or historical titles. So I think it's a dangerous choice for them. but if they come out with a futuristic game, I will certainly play it. They did, of course, have that 2142 style Easter egg hidden in Battlefield 3. I don't know why that was there. Maybe DICE really was considering on making the next Battlefield game futuristic, and then some executives or some internal politics decided to not do that at the last second. Without question, you know that has to be up on the drawing board somewhere at DICE, and there's probably a lot of people in the company that are constantly fighting to take the game in that direction. So I think there's a good chance it could happen someday. Anyway, that wraps it up for today's Mailbox episode. Feel free to leave questions in the comments down below, or you can even ask me on social media platforms, and I will incorporate those questions into next week's video, or next 2 weeks' video, whenever I do the next Mailbox video. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.